Hello and welcome to another edition of Pubcast on Labour Social. Today I'm joined by Sefton Central MP Bill Esterson and Matty Locke, who is a councillor in Maghull, part of Maghull's Town Council. So we're here in the Scotch Piper pub in Lydiate, and this is like the oldest pub in Britain, isn't it? This is it's
the oldest pub in Lancashire, although we are now in Merseyside, but
yeah. In old money,
it's definitely Lancashire.
Yeah,
it's like election time, so we are pounding the streets.
May the 4th.
May the 4th be with you.
Bring your ID.
Oh yeah, photo ID for the first time. This is voter suppression on a grand scale by the Tories.
It is insane, isn't it?
Yeah, importing what the Republicans do in the US to the UK. And
so, am I right in thinking that if you've got a senior rail pass for the Oyster card, a senior Oyster card, you can use that as ID. But if you've got a student Oyster card, you can't.
So the thing is, Graham, not many people in Merseyside have Oyster
cards. I know,
cards.
I'm just giving that as an example.
Actually, there is a serious point here because the Mersey Travel senior card doesn't count.
Oh, really?
Only the national one. So people are going to turn up on May the 4th with their Mersey Travel card and not be able to use it, whether they're old or young. It's almost like the Tories know that people in Merseyside vote Labour. It's almost like it's deliberate, but it's almost like the fact that 3.5 million people don't have photo ID that will allow them to vote, and most of them are more likely to vote Labour. It's almost like that's deliberate, isn't it?
Do you think this will backfire like it has done in, say, Georgia in America, where you've seen lines of people queuing up to vote because they feel like something's been taken away from them, so they're more likely to kick back?
Well, I hope so, but the experience in Northern Ireland is not a good one, where they've had photo ID for 20 years. By the way, in Northern Ireland, there was a problem with voter fraud, where there isn't on the mainland. I mean, there's been one prosecution or one allegation that's been investigated in the last year.
Wow.
And 3.5 million people are denied the right to vote. I mean, this is stealing people's votes. But in Northern Ireland, you've got people who turned up at a polling station in 2003, found they couldn't vote, and have never ever gone back. And I think it's going to be a similar problem on May the 4th. So we're really worried about it.
They want to stop young people voting, don't they? I mean, this might be the first time for a lot of young people to vote. It's a local election, which doesn't necessarily get a massive turnout at the best of times. And people who do want to vote are going to be turned away for nothing.
I mean, how many of your friends
I mean, it'd take quite a lot to stop me voting for myself this year. But
Matty's a candidate, in case you hadn't guessed from that.
I know a heck of a lot of my friends haven't yet got a provisional driving licence.
Yeah.
So immediately they're written off. They haven't got a passport.
They haven't got a passport, yeah.
And when you said about this kicking back, I think it would if enough people knew what was actually going on.
Yeah.
Because what we're hearing is people going, "Oh no, I didn't know you had to do that. I've turned up at the polling station for the best part of 50 years and been able to just vote by saying my name." And it's so key that we are getting that message out that you do, because if you turn up without it, it's unlikely.
And you although you can get a valid ID from your local council, the last date for that is next week.
Yeah.
So if people don't find out before then it's too late. You won't be able to vote. And there is the worry people who do have valid photo ID will turn up and they'll be sent home, and they won't bother going back as well. So this is an absolute nightmare. I mean, what we're doing actually is saying to people, look, if you haven't got photo ID, just fill in a passport, an application for a postal vote, and it gets around the problem.
Yeah, postal voting doesn't need ID, which is...
Well, it does, but it's different. It's not photo ID. You have to just prove through your national insurance number. But my worry is that'll be the next target for the Tories. So if we don't get them out of power in the general election, which I'm sure we'll going to talk about next, which probably is next year.
We're looking at autumn next year.
They'll come back for another go at this.
Yeah. So they've backheeled the Fixed Term Parliament Act, which is the only reason why, one of the only reasons why the Lib Dems went in with the Tories in 2010.
Nice reminder there that you can't trust the Lib Dems either.
Well, I do think, because Like, I think that we need another 1997, and in order to achieve that, I think that there needs to be a little bit of a non-aggression pact between the parties that, can beat the Tories in any given constituency.
I thought that the Lib Dems wouldn't come after us full-throated, then maybe I'd agree with you. But I've seen too much of the Lib Dems attacking us here to really believe that'll ever happen.
Wow, that's painful, because I think the number one priority is getting the Tories out.
But you do that by voting Labour. Look, I mean, honestly, if you want the Tories out, the only way to do that is to vote Labour.
But there's people in the Labour Party who are whinging about voting Labour because of X, Y, Z, and, the People's Popular Front of Judea isn't the correct way of doing it.
But it just lets the Tories off the hook. People don't vote Labour. That's the reality.
Yeah, it does. And my argument is always that, look, who's going to listen to people like me more? I can't lobby the Conservative Party. I'm not a millionaire. I'm not a media owner, media baron, or an oligarch.
Well, you're doing this. You must be a media baron.
With a Labour MP from Merseyside, and this is the kind of thing that we can do. We've got the access, and also I like the idea of once Labour are in power, they'll actually listen to us. We'll have a two-way conversation instead of decrees coming down from above, which is how it feels very much with the Conservatives. Yeah. And then they say it's the will of the people. And you're like, hang on, you just decided this thing. And they're like, oh yeah, they've got a lot of popular support. You look at the polls, no one supports it. They're like, are you crazy? No one wants this thing. And they're pursuing it. So, I don't know. I think they're on a fire sale at the moment, the Conservative Party. I think they know they're on the way out, and they're just getting everything they can through Parliament before they go.
Well, I hope you're right, obviously. But look,
damage they can do.
I mean, look. There is an enormous amount of damage that they can still do. We saw the mini budget in September. The quieting mini budget.
40 billion was it that cost us?
Easily, but look, there is still a premium being paid by people with mortgages. I think today we've just seen figures showing that if you're a first-time buyer, your mortgage at the end of your first fixed term goes up on average by £500 a month. That's £6,000 a year. I mean, that is the price of Tory failure over 13 years, compounded by what Truss and Kwarteng did in September. They crashed the economy. There's no two ways about it. We haven't recovered. And, I'm sure we'll talk about the Labour ads, but remember, Sunak was the Chancellor. If Johnson's Chancellor, he is culpable for this.
Absolutely.
And he actually supports many of the policies that Truss and Kwarteng wanted to bring in, the small state, the low tax base, not for ordinary people, remember, but for the top 1%, which is exactly what Jeremy Hunt did in his budget for Rishi Sunak. So let's not kid ourselves here that they're changed, that they're a different party. They are the same people as when Boris Johnson was in power and when briefly Liz Truss and Kwarteng had the reins.
13 years.
13 years, that's it. 13 years of failure.
This week, there was the attack ad that came out over the weekend, which basically accused Rishi Sunak of not caring that thousands of child abusers were not actually given a custodial sentence. I mean, how are you feeling about that? Do you think that's the right way for Labour to be going, or?
Oh, look, it is absolutely right that we're calling out 13 years of failure, and in 13 years they've presided over a failure in the criminal justice system to prosecute people who've abused children, people guilty of serious crimes. Rapists have been let off the hook right, left and centre. It's taken years to bring prosecutions, so we're absolutely right to call this out and pin the blame on the Conservatives. And there is no way Rishi Sunak should be getting away with the idea that he's new. He's been in Parliament, he's been a minister, he's been the Chancellor. And now he's been the Prime Minister.
And they're saying, he's only been in power he's only been in charge for 6 months. And I'm like, with the last 13 years, a fever dream.
Where was he in Cabinet arguing for action to be taken to prosecute serious and violent offenders? Where was he in Cabinet trying to do something for the victims of crime who need to see those prosecutions? So I think absolutely we're right to call out his role in failing to deal with these problems.
What do you think about it being called out on it by people like David Blunkett, though, in the House of Lords? He's not happy about it, is he?
Well, I don't think that we should apologise for calling out the Tory record. I think we need to hit them very hard over their failure to support victims, their failure to prosecute serious criminals, and just as much as we should call out as we are their failure on the economy, the way they've presided over this low growth. Look, we've had.
Might that have been a better thing to lead with, though, in attack out?
I think you do all of these things.
It's got to be a series of them, isn't it? I'm sure this is your one.
I think actually it's very clever politics to use his own slick previous ads when he was Chancellor, which we all remember. Remember his claiming the credit for everything during the pandemic. That didn't go so well when suddenly we were in
Eat Out to Help House.
Yeah, we were suddenly into a new wave, weren't we?
Yeah.
Which was stoked by Eat Out to Help Out. I think evidence is showing that. And all he wanted was, look, there's a nice glossy picture of Rishi Sunak. He signed it. It's all about his PR and his profile because he wanted to be the next Prime Minister. Well, he finally got his wish via Liz Truss. So don't be surprised if we're just reflecting back what he was trying with his slick advert in saying, look, all of these problems that the Tories have caused, the failure on the economy, the failure on the health service, the cuts in police officers, the failure to prosecute criminals, all of these are Conservative failures over 13 years, and he's got his fingerprints all over it. Or in the way the advert is written, his name is written all over every single one of those Conservative failures over 13 years.
Fair enough. I mean, I was a big fan of the Lincoln Project's stuff that they put out against Trump. The attack stuff they did. I thought that was very slick and very well done and well put together. So, Matty, bring you into the conversation here because this is quite interesting. Bill was telling me that you used to be a Conservative and now you're a born again Labourite.
That is correct.
Is that true?
I've seen the light.
You come to the light side of the force, yeah.
I joined the Conservatives it was around 2020, just before COVID kicked off, and I was active within them for about a year. I saw how they worked. I saw how, in many cases, they didn't work, whether that be on a local or a national scale. I joined as quite a young person, seeing all these shiny, glossy election policies.
Were you influenced by your family, by your friends? I mean, what?
I had a few friends who were that way inclined. My family were floating voters. I think they're quite solidly Labour now. So, yeah. But we saw all of these things promised. We had more slogans just changing and changing, from Get Brexit Done, carrying on through there. And nothing was ever actually properly followed through or delivered. And sort of the performance indicators on all of their promises have never been hit. I run my own business here. Things like when Liz Truss did that to the economy, the amount of contracts that were going through that have now fell into the balance because people just can't afford it. And that's the knock-on effect, you see. That's not just one business struggling. It'll then knock on in my own suppliers and other people, so on and so forth. And it just hasn't been sort of the party of stability as they will once like to see themselves.
Boris Johnson famously said F business, and they have. That's the one promise they kept.
And I mean, when I first joined, I was talking to you sort of about all of the different problems that I faced. My dad's in the car manufacturing industry. They've got big issues going on there with supply chain, with what's happened with Brexit and things.
Been destroyed.
Absolutely. And whole business models have had to be turned on their head. And a lot of this is because 13 years of Conservative government has had no long-term plan, and it's just been short-term slogans at the end of the day.
And taking things that I can't see anything they've created. Like, I was born in 1979, so I've had 31 years of my life now under a Tory government. 31 years. And all I see is in the 60s, they destroyed public transport, they destroyed the trains in this country. In the 80s, they destroyed industry, they destroyed the unions. In the 2010s, they destroyed our economy, and they've destroyed our standing in the world. I mean, you look at just like our credit rating with like Standard & Poor or Moody's. We've dropped off a cliff. People don't want to trade with us. People don't want to trust us with their money anymore, which is devastating. it's the London bubble. It's not. I mean, it's affecting us. We up here in the north as well.
I think it's one of the things that's interesting about Matty's experience, quite apart from how you found the Tories when you're a member of them, and very much welcome the insight he brings about what the Conservative parties are out like, and the some of the intelligence it brings with it. But look, Matty is a budding entrepreneur and already a successful businessman in his own right. And before I became an MP, I started and grew a number of businesses. And I like the fact that we are now very much more obviously the party that attracts people in the private sector. It's what I do in my front bench job, as you know, is Shadow Business and Industry Minister as well. And
so we need an advert with you guys, right? Black and white, arms folded, Labour means business.
Absolutely right, absolutely. And that is the line.
You can have that.
That is the line, Labour does mean yeah. I was using it some time ago, actually, Graham, but we'll have it. I'll send you the check anyway.
The Simpsons already did it.
But Matty is this word stability, and this goes to what I said about the mortgage rates a few minutes ago. £500 extra a month if you're a first-time buyer and you're coming off your first fixed term, on average £500. And that is the result of the instability in the markets that was caused by the way the Conservatives crashed the economy. And you just can't understate how damaging this is. We've got the lowest ever rate of business investment in this country right now. We've got the high mortgage rates. We've got these problems with imports and exports because they've
done nothing right, have they? Is there anything the Tories have been successful at in the last 13 years?
Just a few figures.
So wrecking ball.
But they've given us growth of 1.4% on average for 13 years. When we were in office for 13 years, it was 2.1%. Coincidentally, the OECD average, that's the 38 biggest economies, is 2.1%. We'd had that 2.1% for the last 13 years. Every household would be £8,800 a year better off.
8,800.
Yeah, that's a lot of people. A lot of people not needing to go to food banks, by the way. A lot of people who can afford their energy.
But also, that's a lot more money in the government's coffers to spend on the NHS and
40 billion a year
potholes.
In tax. Yeah, it's 40 billion. Yeah, 40 billion a year in lost tax revenue every year. That is a lot of nurses' pay rises, a lot of teachers' pay rises, a lot of junior doctors, a lot more police officers, firefighters, council staff, you name it. Investment in our infrastructure, including the pothole repairs and the roads resurfacing, of course. But that is the reality of the damage that a Conservative government that has got it so badly wrong on the economy has done. And if the economy's bad, it hits public services. And it didn't start with Liz Truss. It didn't start with Boris Johnson. It started with George Osborne and David Cameron and austerity.
Yeah.
And it carried on ever since.
Yeah. And this is the thing that we need to just keep on banging on, because they like to make out there's been loads of different Tory governments over the last 13 years. Not only, we've had
the fair few
elections,
prime ministers we've had.
And every time they get a new prime minister, it's a new party. It's not. It's the same party. It reminds me like Terminator. It's like it shatters into bits and then kind of gloops together and comes back up. It's like, why would it just die? But it is just this election machine that has been set up to win elections. And it's like a dog. It catches the car. Once it's in power, it doesn't know what to do. It's not done anything to improve my life or anyone that I know. And that goes for people who are entrepreneurs, right through to people who are courier drivers, to people who are teachers, people who are nurses, people who are firefighters. No, I honestly don't know anyone who's done well in the last 13 years out of this Tory government.
And you want to look at the social fabric side of things. Yeah. After Sefton Council, for example, has had £200 million plus cut from its budget. We've got to make some tough decisions, and that doesn't just affect those who are the most vulnerable. It affects the social fabric for those who are doing okay.
Yeah.
When we've got food banks popping open left, right and centre, when we've got potholes in our roads, that's not because we wanted that as a council. That's because of the choices that were made in Westminster that have forced us to mean we have to prioritise. And they're choices that people would never dream of wanting to do at the end of the day.
Yeah. Well, when I met up with Johnny Reynolds and Andrew Gwynn the other week, we were talking about like the last time Labour were in. Like, I just remember things getting better. I wasn't like massively into politics or anything like that. Not like I am now, because politics has affected my life personally more than it had before. But stuff like Sure Start, stuff like the New Deal for musicians. Now, I know people who are really, really helped out by that stuff. And if there's one criticism that I've had with Labour's sort of comms or whatever in the last few years, it's like they don't make enough of how much good stuff Labour did when they were last in power. Because they're kind of a little bit embarrassed about, you know, the Iraq War, which we won't talk about at the moment. But like, obviously that's kind of overshadowed the achievements that Labour managed to get through.
Yeah, I mean, I remember the night of the minimum wage vote, and just how exhilarating it was to find out that something that had been in Labour manifestos for 100 years.
Wow.
At that point, well, I think it's 100, might be slightly less than that, for a very long time.
Yeah.
Had finally been achieved by a Labour government, and the difference that made. You know, that general election campaign, we were reporting multiple stories across the country of security guards who adverts for security guards, £1 an hour and bring your own dog, and that's what people were being paid in the run up to 1997, and we changed that forever.
Yeah.
It's unthinkable we would ever go back. Now, that was something we did change for good. When we left office, we had the best health service in the world.
NHS?
According to the World Health
Organization.
Organization.
Best one in the world?
Yeah, now look at the struggle with waiting times and shortage of staff, which is...
And this week we've got the young doctors going on strike, and theirs has been on strike.
We never had any strikes in the health service.
Yeah.
In fact, we didn't have strikes largely across the public services at all either, actually, in our 13 years. Why? Because we valued public sector workers.
Yeah.
We talked to the unions and talked to the
You
staff.
nipped it in the bud, didn't you? You never got to the point where, because it is a last chance saloon, isn't it? When you go out.
And actually, there are some good examples now, Graham, because good examples in the Liverpool City region of us doing the same thing locally, where we've got that devolution settlement. So the Merseyrail system is run by Merseyrail, which is owned by the Dutch railways, but it's that's the franchise. But the employer is the combined authority in the city region, so they gave the mandate to Merseyrail to negotiate with the trade unions. And guess what? When there was a dispute, it was resolved by settlement, by negotiation, and a pay deal agreed of 7.1%. There was no strike on Merseyrail, and while there was across many of the other franchises. Now, there still was a Network Rail, because that's the government who refused to give Network Rail the mandate to negotiate with the trade union.
Yeah.
That's a prime, and the same thing happened in Wales, actually, and it's happened on the tram system in Greater Manchester. Where Labour's had the power, we've avoided strikes, even in this very tough financial climate, just as we did in government. And that's the kind of difference. We're getting brand new trains. And look, it is so obvious. One of these that frustrates me, every now and then someone will say to me, there is no difference between the Tories and Labour. And it is so patently not true. And you talked about the record in government. I'll just talk about Sure Start. My wife and I adopted 2 children in 2007, and we had a new Sure Start centre opened just at the time the children came to live with us. We benefited enormously from having that advice and that support and that resource alongside the nursery school that my son went into. And we saw the difference it made to families from both the more deprived estates that Sure Start family centre served and the more affluent ones, and how actually it was the families working together and supporting each other that was possibly the most effective part of Sure Start in truth, as much as the professionals who gave the support to them. And it was that kind of approach from a Labour government that made a massive difference. The money that went into education, we were getting new school buildings, just like we were getting that best health service. We had the police officers. We had more police officers when we left office than we've ever had. You know, we really were.
Yeah, it's always got rid of 20,000 on. Now they're saying, oh, we're going to get 20,000 new officers. And I'm like, hang on, just replacing the ones you got rid of.
That's right, isn't it? And I think, you know, we've got the plans. And now you look at the difference. Yeah, the Tories, let's talk about the really big issue, which is the future of the planet.
Yes.
And global warming. Because what are the Tories doing?
Nothing. Worse than nothing. They've got an effective ban on onshore wind farms. Daddy, what did you do in the war? Well, I helped the bad side to win. I mean, it's just like we are facing
just climate delayers. They're climate deniers. I mean, they want a new coal mine in Cumbria,
and they're giving subsidies to the North Sea oil to do some untested carbon capture technology to put the carbon back in the ground.
It's right to use carbon capture technology, but you use it alongside.
Don't know if it's going to work.
Investing in renewable.
It's what they're proposing is untested.
Yeah, sure.
But someone's got to test.
That, by the way, is not the best argument because there's a lot of untested technology out there.
Yeah.
But look, let's just go back to coal for a minute. Because their argument is, well, we need coal for steel production. But that coal is the wrong grade of coal. They're still going to have to import the coal for making steel unless we modernise and use electric arc furnaces, which don't use coal, and work out a technology for using hydrogen as the alternative to gas for some of the energy for some furnaces in steel and glass and ceramics, for example. So that's not even true about the coal being for domestic production. It's not. And as for the oil and gas, what's even worse, I think, is you won't actually see any of that oil and gas being produced for years and years and years. You can get us self-sufficient in electricity generation from the onshore wind by ending that ban, from offshore wind, from more solar even in this country. Or
tidal power in the Mersey, one of the biggest tidal ranges of the world.
There's some fantastic plans for tidal, which is a labour. Rather than unproven, I prefer the word nascent. No, it's the same.
Well, no, I mean,
but you know,
I just always view with suspicion anything that is backed by the fossil fuel companies because they've got a vested interest in us using all the fossil fuel that is left. With each peak oil, they're like, okay, we're running out of this stuff. We need to sell every last dirty cent of it.
Well, there are some people who take that view. Actually, increasingly, they've realised because of the way the markets are that there isn't a market for investing in oil and gas in the same way there was. There is a market for investing in renewable, and those companies don't really want to end up still holding fossil fuel assets.
Well, yeah.
So there is a move to invest in renewables.
But very slow, though, isn't it?
It is. The Trump is the Tories are encouraging exactly what you're.
When did BP change its name to Beyond Petroleum? 1989 was it? Wow, that's over 30 years ago, kids.
Yeah, and look, I think though that there is there is an important role for the oil and gas companies in moving to hydrogen and in
hydrogen for industry. I don't think we're going to be driving hydrogen cars. You got to freeze it, don't you?
You're right about that. And look, there is there is a real need for the workforce.
Yeah.
To be able to develop the new skills, to be able to transition, to be a part of the future of renewable electricity generation. Look, our plan is to develop self-sufficiency in renewable electricity generation and setting up for this great British energy company, publicly owned. Yeah. This is all exciting stuff.
This would be fantastic. It would be a real game changer.
Yeah, this is where Labour is completely different to the Tories.
Well, one of the things, and I've talked to Matty about this, is that what was your experience working with the Conservatives? Because all I see from the outside is an absolute lack of joined-up thinking. They don't see how anything's connected. It's all just single-issue things that they'll fixate on for a little bit, and then they'll go off and fixate on something else. So it never seems to be connected.
That's exactly the experience.
Right, okay, good. It's not just me then.
That is why, especially when the things were coming out about GB Energy, we had, at that time, Steve Rotherham was already in talks putting the first stages of investment in for tidal powered energy. That's under Labour. Whereas at the same time the Tories are saying we're going to frack, and then they're going, oh no, we're not going to frack. Oh no, we are going to frack. And it was just a completely, one hand wants to do one thing, one hand wants to do the other. And half them,
you've forgotten about fracking.
Half frack it out.
Half the membership was going, oh, this will be great. And then the minute it turned around, we were coming out, okay, Rishi Sunak was against fracking, it's all good, you can feel safe to vote for us again. And you're going, this isn't a functional way of doing things. It's not going to create investment, it creates uncertainty, and that's the only thing it does create at the end of the day. And it puts off that green investment that we do need, that will also begin to bring down them energy prices.
But we haven't got that much oil, we haven't got that much gas, we haven't got that much coal, but we have got so much renewable power in this country. We're an island, you know, in the North Sea. There's loads of energy, whether it's from the air or from the tide or from solar. I mean,
do you know what?
It's there.
I mean, the decarbonisation agenda, and we've got fantastic plans for this. We've got an industrial strategy that's based around it. We've got a green transformation fund, and we've got fantastic technologies out in this country that are some of the best in the world. The tragedy is that the Tories blew really key moves from when we left office. So in 2010, we had the world's best wind generation industry offshore. And the Tories blew that because they pulled the subsidies. Denmark now has the world's lead. Japan has. And what do? We import the steel and the components for our wind turbines. We've got more of them than anybody else because of the wind, because we have the wind. But this is what the Tories have done wrong, and they're going to do the same thing again if we let them on tidal, where we are at the moment the most advanced country in developing this. This is really exciting technology.
It is,
and it's got huge potential. Entirely predictable. Twice a day, you know when it's going to go, and you can base it all the way around the coast. Because all the way around the coast, you then cover all parts of the day where you've got strong tidal stream. But they're going to do the same thing with, I was talking to a company just today as it happens, who make ground source heat pumps. They've been making them a long time. And what they were showing me is just how efficient it is to get energy from the ground, where the temperature stays pretty consistent all year round. And in the depths of winter, when it's freezing out there, it's about 10 degrees underground. And that is a much better way of getting your heat from a heat pump. And it's much more efficient than burning gas in a boiler, however good you can boiler.
I'm guessing it's cheaper in the long run as well, because gas has gone through the roof now in terms of the cost of it.
And this company has got the lead in the world for doing networked ground source heat pumps. And you can just see it. The Tories will not support them, they won't invest in them, they won't create the favourable conditions to enable them to really power on, if you'll excuse the pun. But it's at the heart of our industrial strategy to ensure that companies like this are successful.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've got a shopping list of things that I'd like to see on day one of a new Labour administration. Here in the Northwest, I mean, I've travelled the world on public transport. I don't know if you know this, I've been to every country in the world without flying. And it was all on buses and trains and cargo ships and stuff. So I sort of have a vested interest and a sort of, a fascination with how public transport works. I'm a great believer that you don't have social mobility. You can't have social mobility unless you've got physical mobility. And at the moment, you've got people living in villages who are just locked in their own homes or under house arrest because they can't get out. They haven't got a car. The bus comes once every second Thursday. And if they miss that, they're trapped somewhere on the other side of the county. And I'm thinking, like in Liverpool in particular, I used to live in Oliver Park, so I'd get the Ormskirk train to Central each day. And Merseyrail is a really good system, although it's owned by a Dutch company, which annoys me because I think that should all be...
We're about to own the trains.
Yes.
We're taking one part.
That would be fantastic. But also, I mean, what about extending the franchise so it goes all the way to Wigan, so we don't have those stupid barriers in Ormskirk and in Kirkby?
I mean, there are some plans to extend it to Skelmersdale, where there's no train station.
They took the train station away, and then they filled it full of people. Skelmersdale, like Runcorn, was one of the new towns of the 1960s. But in the early 60s, they shut down the train station and pulled up the track. I'm great.
And after just having a by-election there, we've heard it from residents time and time and time again.
Yeah.
We're trapped here. If you don't have a car, you can't even walk.
Because there's a really poor quality bus service as well.
But I think that was the Tories' intention. The Tories' transport minister in the 1960s was a guy called Ernest Marples, who happened to own a company called Marples Ridgeway Construction. You'll never guess what they used to make. Motorways. But it's okay, because when he was in the Ministry of Transport, he sold all his shares to his wife for £1.
That's all right then.
Yeah.
To see.
But no, I'd like to see the...
I mean, it's not like there's been any history of corruption recently.
No.
You know.
Well, he left the country owing the taxman something like £3 million. He went to Monte Carlo with his, or Switzerland or somewhere with his ill-gotten gains.
I wasn't, of course, thinking about the billions of pounds in PPE that's been...
PPE and the bloke with the bounce-back loans that people just set up companies. Your company was supposed to have been set up several years before, and people were setting up companies in the afternoon and applying to HSBC for a bounce-back loan and getting it. And Rishi Sunak was also getting a green card for America, so he was planning to make America his forever home. And his wife was a non-dom. He's worth, what, 700 million? And also, I mean, this is another thing that I talk about a lot when I talk about Labour and the idea of Labour coming into power again, is this whole thing of being able to actually have a conversation with people who have lived a relatively normal life. Because a lot of, Boris Johnson did not lead a normal life. He went to Eton, he went to, he went to Oxbridge, and then he was given a job because he had connections in the news.
I don't understand the problem, no.
And then when Rishi Sunak was asked, he went to Winchester and then he went to Oxford. And he was asked about, this was when he was interviewed as a young student, I think. And he said, you get people from all walks of life. You get people who are upper class, people who are upper middle class. And I've got working class friends. Oh, no, I don't have any working class friends. And I'm just like, oh my God, these people are just, they can't possibly empathise with the struggle that people have who are working full-time as nurses and having to use food banks or struggling to feed their own children, having to choose between heating or eating. How can they empathise if they've always lived in a lap of luxury?
Yeah, and I think it's having policies that look after ordinary people, isn't it? Yeah, it's recognising what are people's priorities. One of my joys about being an MP in the last 30 years, I've got to know Margaret Beckett really well, and the stories she tells about our time in government when she was a cabinet minister are legendary, and the number of times she saved the day and stopped them doing daft things, I think on its own is you should interview Margaret, actually.
That'd be good. And where can we way to the top?
she says this, and it's that we are at our best when our priorities are the people's priorities. It's a really simple concept. But, I do this here. What do people here care about? They care about the fact they can't get a GP appointment. They care about the fact the roads are a mess, actually.
But that's affecting their life.
They care about the fact there aren't enough police.
Yeah.
And my word, they do care about the appalling state of the economy. Of course they do. And there's a cost of living crisis, and their wages have fallen, and food has gone through the roof, and their energy bill's gone through the roof. Those are the things that matter to people, and that's what we've got to set out to fix. That's what we've got to show we're going to do something about on day one. If we get those right, we've got a chance of dealing with some of the other challenges ahead of it. By the way, dealing with some of the other challenges, of course, is how you deal with the day-to-day. So good, well-paid jobs in the green economy, in the energy sector, insulating millions of homes. All of those things.
They announced, didn't they, in the budget? They said we're gonna insulate 1% of all. I think it was less than 1%. That was their big headline. We're not going to insulate 99% of people's homes. Ta-da!
I mean, they had a scheme. They had a scheme for about 2 years ago, which Sunak introduced as Chancellor, that was supposed to be about insulating millions of homes. And they did about 30,000 homes with it, and it failed in the end. And it was just an absolute farce, because it was completely impossible to apply to and to marry up the companies who were going to do the work with the people who wanted the work doing, and they've done the same thing with air source heat pumps, talking about ground sourced earlier, but air source heat pumps, which supposedly you can get £5,000 towards. Well, who on earth can afford them?
Yeah.
And then you find out they actually cost 17,000, so you need 12,000 to take advantage of the 5,000 you're being given. And then you find out, one of my constituents was telling me, he went direct to the supplier and he found out it was actually cheaper to buy it direct
Without
without a subsidy. So this
someone's making some money, aren't they?
nonsense that the Tories have. Yeah. So you get a headline, you get a press release, you get the sort of thing you experience with the Tories, Matty, and you get nothing as
a load of hot air.
But what I'm tired of is being told what I care about. And Lee Anderson let the cat out of the bag a few weeks ago, didn't he, when he was asked? And 30p, I think it was 30p Lee, or the other one, maybe it was the other one. I always get them mixed up. Gullis, Howler Monkey. His parents paid a lot for his education. I think they should get their money back. But no, I think it was Lee Anderson who was being interviewed, and he said, we've lost Boris Johnson, we can't talk about Brexit anymore. So the next election is going to be fought on immigration, so refugees and trans people. And I'm like, honestly, on my list of priorities right now is the fact that it's April and I am freezing in my own home because I don't put the heating on and it's still cold outside.
There's a really good piece of advice from the Australian Labor Party. Yeah, the Tory leader in Australia, Scott Morrison, and Anthony Albanese, when they started the campaign, he said, Morrison's more interested in what you got in your pants.
Yeah.
I'm more interested in what you got in your wallet. And that was the defining moment in that election campaign. And I think we've got to make that contrast. We care about what you care about.
Exactly.
We're going to fix the problems in society that are going to make you and your family better off. And sort out the social fabric, which was what you were talking about, Matty.
I would like to feel listened to. I think that's my main thing. And I think there's a lot of people who have felt in the last few years, especially, increasingly powerless, and these things being put on top of us. And then I get insulted about, first of all, being called the part of the metropolitan elite, but also whenever the Tories seem to do something nowadays, they always back it up with, this is what the people want. And I'm like, there's no evidence for that. And it's infuriating.
And when you touched on the point of immigration from Lee Anderson, the party that's been in for the last 13 years, who've let immigration skyrocket, who've let actual being reviews of the individual cases drop to an all-time low, and that's meant we have to put people in hotels, we're the Conservative Party. So if they're so bothered about immigration, why don't they sort it out?
Exactly.
Yeah, there's 8 times as many people who are waiting to have their cases assessed as there were when we left office. 8 times as many. And that's the Tories' record on small boat crossing.
Yeah, but they're not processing applications because they want people to be in these hotels to be a target, and so that they can say, hey, you know this problem that we've created? We're going to solve it. And it's like, we didn't have this problem before. Before 2018, there weren't people coming over in boats because they knew they'd just get sent back to France. We've lost that deal that we had with the EU.
The Dublin Agreement.
Yeah, we've lost that now. And so people coming over here, we don't know what to do with them.
There's no returns agreement.
No.
They're not processing the asylum claims. Yeah. They don't have the workforce to go after the criminal gangs. 3/4 of whom live in this country, and they've alienated other countries through their antagonistic approach over Brexit. The party that caused the problem is not going to fix the problem, whether it's small boats, whether it's the economy, the health service, police, or anything else.
Yeah, I think Labour need to make a lot of that and talk about the fact they're doing this to us.
We're going to have to prioritise all this in government, and so much of it needs doing straight away. The question is what do we do first?
Yeah. Well, that's it. It's a question of priority. I mean, the thing is, your first 5 years in office are going to be just fixing the Tories' mistakes.
Well, we are, but we have got to get an investment place to create the energy industry and put it in place, put the grid capacity in, put the EV charge points in, that enable in the gigafactories. We're so far behind Germany and America. We've got to respond to Joe Biden with this Inflation Reduction Act, which, by the way, is the most clever bit of politics ever. because he called it the Inflation Reduction Act to con the Republicans into voting for it.
Yeah,
and
he's
now
a
they've
clever
got
man.
this stimulus.
He's a clever man.
He's a good politician.
But also they've brought the EU on board with that, haven't
Well, the
they?
EU's
And we're
gotta-
not part of
gotta
the EU
respond to it.
anymore. No, they've had a preliminary talks about basically saying
How do you
it's
get a
made
benefit from it? Yeah.
because they weren't allowed to use any green products that weren't made in America, and now they said, well, if they're made in the EU, then we're going to give them a let on that, and we're being let out in the cold. And the world seems like we are moving it ahead with this green revolution, which is going to be as big in scale and money and everything else, finance, as the Industrial Revolution. And we are being just left in the dust.
It's a dangerous world. We need energy security. We need defence security. We need trade. And at the moment, we have set our face against the world because of a Tory government.
We've got a trade deal with Brunei, mate. We're going to sell them all our Scotch whisky, even though alcohol's not allowed in Brunei. So good.
This CPTPP, which is the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership.
Easy for you to say.
I was a shadow trade minister for 4 years, so I got to know that. Otherwise, I wouldn't have had a chance. It's worth 0.088. Thank you, percent. You knew this figure. Of our GDP, so it's a few quid here and there. Loose change when you know that we lost 4% of GDP through Brexit. That's the reality.
Yeah.
That's the Tories for you.
Yeah, but give it a 500 years' time, we'll be back back where we were in 2016. But yeah, that is something as well. Obviously, we talked a lot about Brexit and where Labour's going to go next with its relationship with the EU. And one of the things I kept on pointing out during the battle over Brexit was that most of the rich countries in the world happen to be on our neighbourhood. Fortunate as us. And people go, oh, but we're free to trade with the rest of the world. In which I put my head in my hands and go, unfortunately, and I wish this wasn't so, but there's about 200 countries in the world, and 150 of them are really poor, relatively poor. And they're not, the vast majority of people in those countries are not going to be able to buy our stuff. And we don't want to have trade deals just to get things cheap. We want to sell stuff.
And you're right. And also, every country in the world tends to trade more with its immediate neighbours than anywhere else.
Economic gravity.
It's just very obvious geography.
But this is really boring for people. So you talk to this and they go, oh, you're talking about trade, and they kind of turn off. They like the emotional arguments.
But it's jobs, it's money coming into the country, it's how the taxes flow in to pay for nurses, doctors, appointments in hospitals and GPs, police officers on our streets, the roads being improved, the better railways and bus services we were just talking about. It's the whole game, and you have to have a good, balanced economic and trade policy. That, by the way, is what our industrial strategy is, which is a 10-year plan rather than the
10-minute plan. 10-minute Tory.
I think one of the main things that Labour need to do as soon as they get into office is renegotiate our situation with the EU, because they are our biggest trade partners. There's no two ways about it. And also things that are really affecting people. We need to get back into Erasmus. We need to get back into Horizon. And also, I mean, the deal that musicians have at the moment, let's talk about a new deal, a new European deal for musicians, where they said, oh, well, we're going to backtrack a little bit on musicians themselves needing a visa to do a tour around Europe. But their roadies are not getting that. Their technical people are not getting that. So it seems like a double blow after.
The musicians are the perfect example. Both UK musicians wanted to tour in the EU, and EU musicians wanted to come and hold their gigs here. They're hit both ways because of a lack of agreement. Yeah, it's the same on people moving more widely for work. It's the same on recognition of qualifications. It's the same on data. It's the same on movement of goods and the friction on trade in both directions. And the result is shortages of goods in this country, real stresses in supply chains in manufacturing, real problems in services, real problems for businesses who want to trade internationally, where they have to go and move to set up in the European Union. And they stop trading here, by the way, when they do that. I mean, we have to fix this, and it will be one of the priorities of Labour in government.
Well, it has to be. If Labour don't manage to get hold of this, they'll be out in 5 years after this. And again, to go back to the last Labour government, and I think a huge mistake that was made in the last few elections with Labour was there was sort of this embarrassment about the Blair years, about about the last time Labour were in power.
Well, we have to celebrate what we did in government.
Yeah, I really agree with that.
And we used to win elections.
Yes.
Perhaps we could learn from how we did it.
Yes.
Get it right next time.
Still remember that glorious day in like '97.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna do it again next year. We'll have another glorious day.
So anyway, thanks for joining us here in
Thank
the
you.
pub for a pint and a natter, putting the world to rights.
Nice pint. I'll let other people judge the conversation.
But until next time, you've been watching Pubcast, and we'll see you on the Labour Social channel very soon. Ta-da.